Hey neighbor, 29 degrees this morning. Did we cover up our vegetables, and when do you need to cover up your vegetables? We're going to talk about that today. No, I did not cover up my cool season crops this morning, even at 29 degrees. So we're going to cover all the different crops that we can think of to let you know from my experience, when do you need to cover them up to not have damage. And then we're going to talk about different strategies and different materials you can use to cover up when that time comes. So first of all, let's talk about cool weather crops such as cabbage, collards, kale, you know the spiel, radishes, beets, and those kind of things. When plants are small, when you just set them out and help them to get established, they are more susceptible to cold than mature plants are. You can see my top chopped collards here had a pretty heavy frost on them last night, but these babies are mature and they can take a lot more cold weather than it was if I had just transplanted them. So even though we're talking about the same crop, it can make a difference at the stage of life they're in, how much cold they can take. So let's talk about cabbage and kale and collards first. Okay, cabbage and collards, if I'm just putting them out and those plants are small, I want to cover them up, man, about 28 degrees. If it's going to get 28 degrees or less, I'm going to cover those up and protect those. Now, once they get mature, cabbage and collards can take a lot of cold. You may read on the internet some different experiences than what I've had, but they'll take it down to 20 degrees without covering them up at all, with very little if no damage. Now, if you get into the teens, that's when you can start getting some damage, burning of the leaf, or that cabbage will actually, the head will bust on it. So down to 20 degrees on good mature things such as collards and cabbage. Now kale, and let's talk about lettuces, broccoli, cauliflower, those other things. I treat them just a little bit different. Still, if it's going to get below 28 degrees when the plants are small, I'm going to cover them up and protect them. But at about 25 degrees, I'm going to cover my kale, I'm going to cover up my, my broccoli, my cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, anything like that. Brussels sprouts can probably take a little bit more than that, but I'm going to cover most of those up at about 25 degrees. If it gets that or going to get colder, I'm going to put a cover over those. Now, two crops that can take a lot of cold is going to be spinach and Swiss chard. Those babies there could take it down to 20 degrees easy. So I normally don't worry about those unless it's going to get down into the teens or below that. And here in the deep south where we live, we don't have to worry about that very often. Onions. Well, a lot of people worry about their onions. We don't worry about onions unless it's going to get below 20 degrees. Well, here's my leafy greens, rutabagas, mustard, turnips, and you can still see I got a heavy frost on there from last night. About 28 degrees is going to be, 25 to 28 degrees is going to be my threshold for these to cover these up. What's going to happen if they get some damage, they're going to get some burn around the outside edge of those leaves. Even if you get that, you can cut them off, and most of the time they come back and you can salvage the plant. But to protect that foliage that we already got out there, cover them 25 to 28 degrees. Strawberries, whether you're growing them in a vertical planter like this or growing them in ground, can take a lot of cold at a specific time in their life there. As the plants are growing, heck, they could take it down to 20 degrees without any damage. The problem is when we start putting on the blooms and we start putting on fruit, then we have to treat them a little bit different. So 20 degrees is my threshold on strawberries when they don't have blooms or don't have fruit. But once we get blooms open up and we're setting fruit, we change that to 30 degrees. We want to protect those strawberry blooms and the strawberry fruit because we will get substantial damage below 30 degrees. There you have it, 20 degrees when we're growing them and 30 degrees once we start putting on blooms and fruit. Now carrots are another one of those that can take a good bit of cold weather. We like to grow our carrots in the wintertime, overwinter them so they get good flavor to them come springtime. 18 to 20 degrees is kind of my threshold for when I'm going to cover up my carrots. Now let's talk about one of those in-betweeners that everybody has problems or concerns about in the springtime is our Irish potatoes. We plant our Irish potatoes in February, and it seems like every year when they come up, we're going to have a pretty good cold spell come in. Everybody really stresses about that. Irish potatoes will burn below 32 degrees, but they normally will come back out. So if we get a little burn, it's not a huge concern for me. And we normally cover those at about 30 to 32 degrees. If we see it's going to get that or below, we normally try to protect them in some fashion. Okay, we've covered cool season, we've covered the kind of in-between stuff, potatoes. Let's talk about warm season stuff. Let's just, tomatoes, eggplants, peppers, those things that you plant in the springtime, and we have that cold spell coming, the plants are small. When do we protect them? Well, my rule of thumb on those is about 38 degrees for my warm season crops. And the reason for that is the biggest problem we have is frost. Frost can cause a lot more damage sometimes than actually the cold weather can. And we can get a frost above freezing, which is 32 degrees. That's the reason my rule of thumb is I cover up my warm season crops anywhere around the 38 degree range. So let's talk about what to use, what strategy you use to cover, what materials you're going to use to cover to protect those plants. And while we're on the subject, we'll go ahead and cover potatoes first, Irish potatoes. Irish potatoes is one of those few things that I think straw and pine straw probably works as good on that crop as it does anything else. I don't like to use straws on a lot of things such as collards and kales and things like that because the plants are taller, they're harder to get them off of them without damaging them and all that kind of stuff. But now Irish potatoes are normally real small and they're tough and it's easy to get that material off of them once it warms up. So wheat straw or pine straw actually work pretty good for covering up those Irish potato plants when they're small to protect them from that frost or that cold weather. All right, so let's talk about our options, what we can use to cover up. We just touched on straw. Straw is a good option for those taters. It's not the best option for me for other plants, as I mentioned, but let's talk about poly. And when we're talking about poly, we're talking about plastic here, and this is readily available at just about any hardware store or lawn and garden store here. Definitely don't want to use the black. You want to use the clear here. Clear poly is definitely an option to cover up your plants and to keep them from getting damaged here. Probably one of the most economical options to use there, but it does have a couple of drawbacks. It's easy to get. This here's a 6 mil, so it's definitely reusable there. But the problem with the poly is if you put them on your plants and it warms up during the day, they can get hot underneath that and cause some damage. So you want to make sure if you do use poly, and it's best if you could suspend it off from the plant just a little bit, that you need to be around so if the temperature gets up so that you can pull this off, because it doesn't breathe, it doesn't allow that plant to breathe underneath there and get air underneath there, and it will warm up and get a lot warmer than any other material I know of. Now here's a good option if you're doing raised beds or you don't have a lot you need to cover up here, and that is an old sheet. We keep old sheets around specifically for this reason here. Now I don't necessarily like to use blankets, anything that's real heavy. This is kind of a heavier sheet here, but this is probably one of the best options if you just got a couple raised beds or small plot that you need to cover up. With this option here, the fabric is not too heavy, so we're not going to damage our plant there. And this option here is we don't have to buy anything. Everybody's got a few old sheets laying around, and we keep them specifically for this right here. You can pull them off there. They breathe, so they're not going to damage your plant. If it turns off warm or hot during the day and you got this on there, you're not going to damage your plants. And this here is the fourth option. This is a row cover, and this is the one we sell here, which is the DeWitt 1.5 ounce material right here. And this works best for you guys that's got bigger gardens out there. Now this here stuff is going to be more expensive than the other options that I have covered. So if you got a small garden, this is probably not the best way for you to go, just a raised bed or two, use your sheet. This right here is going to work best if you got bigger gardens, because this stuff here is reusable. You take care of it, fold it up, you can reuse it year after year, and it is longer length than what your blankets or sheets is going to be. And also we can cut this for whatever row size we need. This particular roll is 6 by 25 feet, 6 foot wide and 25 foot long. So we could actually put them together to make a bigger, in the middles there, we'll staple them down so we can cover a wider row than that. 25 feet, if we don't need that much, we can cut it. Or if we need longer than that, we can overlap it and staple it together to get those longer rows here. This material is breathable, so we can leave it on there for a number of days, not have to worry about it if it does get warm. With this material being 6 foot wide, if we want to cover multiple rows, what we'd do is come in here and lay us another row here, let it overlap a little bit right here, and then we would staple it down. Same thing on the end. If we need to extend our row out after we run out of this right here further than 25 feet, we would just overlap it up, staple it down, and keep on going. All right, my preferred method of anchoring these covers down is going to be sod staples right here. Now you can use blocks or sandbags or bricks in a pinch, and they'll definitely work, but these sod staples right here are easy to put down, they're easy to handle, they're easy to store once we want to pull the cover up here. They just work great. So for the sheets here, I don't want to make the wife mad, so I probably wouldn't use the sod staples in here because it's going to damage anything. So anything heavy on these smaller beds right here to hold the sheet down, keep the wind from blowing away, any kind of weight would probably work best for this. Well, here in the deep south, we can grow our food year round, but there's going to be times that we're probably going to have to protect those crops because we know we're going to have some cold weather come in. Whether you use a sheet for your small beds there, or you're going to use some poly, or you're going to invest in some row cover here. Understand, if you garden during the wintertime, you're going to have those times where you need to protect those crops, and you're going to need to have those supplies on hand because it normally runs up on us before we can think about it and prepare for it. So that's the reason I encourage people to have their supplies on hand. When it does get cold, you run out there and you can cover them up, you can protect them so that you don't damage your crops that we've worked so hard at to get them to growing and looking nice, so we can enjoy these crops all winter long.